The morning sun had barely broken through the thick clouds hanging over the small village of when finished packing her only suitcase. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded the last of her worn clothes, most of them hand-me-downs from her older sisters or patched together by her mother's careful stitching. The suitcase itself was old, a relic from her grandmother's days, with a broken lock that she had to secure with a piece of rope. But it held everything she owned in this world, and today it would travel with her to a place she had only seen in magazines and television shows. Was 23 years old, with skin the color of rich mahogany and eyes that sparkled with determination despite the hardships she had faced. She had grown up in a forgotten corner of the countryside where opportunities were as scarce as the rain during drought season. Her father had died when she was 12, leaving her mother to raise 5 children on the meager income from their small farm. Being the eldest, had watched her dreams of finishing school slip away as she took on extra work to help feed her younger siblings. For years, she had worked odd jobs around the village. She cleaned houses, helped with harvests, sold vegetables at the local market, and did whatever else would bring a few coins to her family. She never complained, though her heart sometimes ached with the weight of responsibilities that seemed too heavy for someone so young. Her mother often told her that she had the strongest spirit of all her children, a spirit that refused to break no matter how hard life pushed against it. The opportunity that was taking her away from had come unexpectedly, like a sudden rain in the dry season. Mrs., a wealthy woman who owned a vacation home near the village, had been looking for someone to care for her nephew in the city. The nephew, she explained, was a man named, and he needed someone with patience, dedication, and a gentle heart. Mrs. had watched for months, observing how she cared for the elderly in the village, how she never turned away anyone who needed help, and how she carried herself with quiet dignity despite her circumstances. When Mrs. offered her the position, could hardly believe it. The salary was more than she could make in 6 months of work in the village. It would change everything for her family. Her mother could hire help for the farm, her siblings could stay in school, and perhaps, just perhaps, there would be enough left over to fix the leaking roof before the rainy season began. But the position came with challenges that Mrs. had been careful to explain. Was not just any patient. He was a 35-year-old billionaire who had built his fortune in technology and real estate before a devastating car accident 2 years ago left him paralyzed from the waist down. The accident had happened on a rainy night when his car skidded off a bridge, and though he survived, his life had changed forever. He could no longer walk, could no longer do the things he once took for granted, and the vibrant, energetic man he had been was now confined to a wheelchair, bitter and withdrawn from the world. Mrs. had warned that was difficult. He had driven away 7 caregivers in the past year alone. Some left because of his harsh words, others because they could not handle his dark moods and angry outbursts. He refused to see friends, rarely spoke to his family, and spent most of his days locked in his mansion, pushing away anyone who tried to get close. The doctors said his body was healing as well as could be expected, but his spirit was broken, and no amount of physical therapy seemed to reach the deep wound inside him. Listened to all of this with a calm expression, though inside her heart raced with uncertainty. She had never been to the city before, had never cared for someone so wealthy or so troubled. But she thought of her mother's tired eyes, of her youngest sister who needed new shoes, of her brother who dreamed of becoming a teacher. She thought of all the reasons she had to be brave, and she accepted the position. Now, as she stood in the small bedroom she had shared with her sisters for as long as she could remember, she felt the weight of what she was about to do. Her mother stood in the doorway, her face a mixture of pride and worry. She was a strong woman, weathered by years of hard work and loss, but there were tears in her eyes as she looked at her eldest daughter. "You don't have to do this," her mother said softly. "We will manage somehow, we always have." Turned to her mother and smiled, though her own eyes were misting over. "Mama, this is our chance. This is how things get better. I'll be fine. I'm strong, remember? You told me so yourself." Her mother crossed the small room and pulled into a tight embrace. She smelled of wood smoke and the lavender soap she made from the plants in their garden. "You are strong, my daughter, stronger than you know, but promise me you will take care of yourself too. Don't lose who you are in that big city." "I promise, Mama," whispered, holding her mother close. Her siblings gathered around, hugging her one by one. Her youngest sister, Grace, who was only 8, cried openly, clinging to Skirt. "Don't go, who will tell me stories at night?" Knelt down and wiped Grace's tears with her thumb. I'll write you letters with new stories, even better ones, and I'll come visit when I can. You be good for Mama, okay? The journey to the city took 6 hours by bus, and spent most of it staring out the window, watching the familiar landscape of her childhood gradually transform into something foreign and overwhelming. The rolling hills and green fields gave way to concrete buildings and crowded streets. The air changed, too, from the fresh smell of earth and grass to something metallic and strange. By the time the bus pulled into the central station, felt like she had traveled to another world entirely. Mrs. had arranged for a driver to pick her up. The man, a quiet, older gentleman named Thomas, helped her with her suitcase and led her to a sleek black car that looked more expensive than her family's entire house. Slid into the back seat, her hands running over the soft leather, her eyes wide with wonder. She had never been in such a vehicle before. As Thomas drove through the city streets, pressed her face to the window, taking in everything. Tall buildings reached toward the sky like glass mountains. People rushed past in clothes that looked like they belonged in fashion magazines. Cars honked and weaved through traffic in a chaotic dance. Restaurants and shops lined every street, their windows displaying things she had only dreamed of. It was exciting and terrifying all at once. After 30 minutes, they turned into a quieter neighborhood where the houses were set back from the road, hidden behind high walls and iron gates. Thomas pulled up to one such gate, pressed a button on a remote, and the gate swung open to reveal a long driveway lined with perfectly manicured trees. At the end of the driveway stood a mansion that took breath away. It was 3 stories tall, built of pale stone with large windows that gleamed in the afternoon sun. Ivy climbed up one side of the building, giving it an elegant, timeless quality. The grounds were immaculate, with gardens full of flowers had never seen before, fountains that sparkled with water, and pathways made of smooth stones. It looked like something from a fairy tale, beautiful and imposing. Thomas helped her out of the car and carried her suitcase to the front door. Before he could knock, the door opened, and a woman in her 50s stepped out. She was dressed in a crisp uniform and had an air of authority about her. "You must be," the woman said, her voice polite but measured. "I'm the house manager. Welcome to estate. Mrs. has told us about you. Please come in." Followed into the house, and if she thought the outside was impressive, the inside was absolutely stunning. The entrance hall had marble floors that shone like mirrors, a grand staircase that curved up to the second floor, and a chandelier that sparkled with what looked like 1,000 crystals. Paintings in ornate frames hung on the walls, and fresh flowers in tall vases filled the air with a sweet fragrance. Led her through several rooms, explaining the layout of the house as they walked. There was a formal dining room, a library with shelves that reached to the ceiling, a music room with a grand piano, and a sitting room with furniture that looked too beautiful to actually sit on. Finally, they reached a wing of the house that explained was the staff quarters. "This will be your room," said, opening a door to reveal a space that was larger than the bedroom had shared with her sisters. It had a comfortable bed, a wardrobe, a desk by the window, and its own bathroom. It seemed like luxury beyond imagination. "It's beautiful," said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm glad you like it," replied with a slight smile. "You can settle in for a bit. Dinner will be served in the staff dining room at 6. Tomorrow morning I'll take you to meet Mr. and explain your duties in detail. I should warn you, he can be quite challenging. He prefers to be left alone most of the time, and he doesn't take kindly to those who try too hard to please him. Just do your job, be respectful, and don't take his moods personally." "I understand," said, though her stomach tightened with nervousness. Nodded and left, closing the door softly behind her. Sat on the bed, her hands smoothing over the soft comforter. She thought about the man she would be caring for. She imagined him as cold and distant, hardened by his pain. She wondered if she would be strong enough to handle whatever he threw at her. That night barely slept. She tossed and turned, thinking about her family, about the massive house she was now living in, and about the man she would meet in the morning. When dawn finally broke, she rose early, washed, and dressed in the simple but clean uniform had left for her. She tied her thick hair back in a neat bun and looked at herself in the mirror. She looked scared, but she also looked determined. At 8 o'clock sharp came to fetch her. They walked through the house in silence until they reached a set of double doors on the second floor. Knocked twice and then opened one of the doors, gesturing for to follow. The room they entered was massive, with high ceilings and large windows that let in floods of morning light. But despite the brightness, there was something heavy about the atmosphere, something that felt dark and suffocating. The room was filled with expensive furniture and medical equipment, but it felt cold, unlived and despite being occupied. In the center of the room, facing the windows with his back to them, sat a man in a wheelchair. Even from behind, could see he was tall and broad-shouldered. His dark hair was slightly long, falling just past his collar. He wore a simple black shirt and didn't turn around when they entered. "Mister," said in a clear voice, "this is your new caregiver." There was a long silence. The man in the wheelchair didn't move, didn't acknowledge their presence. His heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her face calm. Finally spoke, his voice deep and laced with bitterness. "Another one? How long until this one runs away crying? 3 days, 4. His expression didn't change. "I'll leave you two to get acquainted," she said simply, and before could protest, she turned and left the room, closing the door behind her. Stood there, her hands clasped in front of her, unsure of what to do or say. The silence stretched on, becoming more uncomfortable with each passing second. "Well," said, still not turning around, "aren't you going to introduce yourself? Tell me all about how dedicated you are, how you're different from all the others. That's usually how it goes." Took a breath, steadying herself. I'm from a village called, I'm here to help you in whatever way you need." "Whatever way I need." Finally turned his wheelchair around and for the first time saw his face. He was handsome, with sharp features, intense dark eyes, and a strong jaw. But those eyes were filled with so much pain and anger that it was almost physical. He looked her up and down with barely concealed contempt. "What I need is to be left alone. What I need is for people to stop pretending they can fix me. But apparently that's too much to ask." Met his gaze steadily. "I'm not here to fix you, mister. I'm here to care for you. There's a difference." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps, but it was quickly replaced by his usual coldness. "Is that so? Well, let me tell you how this is going to work. You'll do the basic tasks I can't manage myself, you'll stay out of my way the rest of the time, and you'll keep your pity and your inspirational speeches to yourself. I've heard them all, and they mean nothing. Understood?" "Understood," said quietly. "Goods, now get out. I don't need anything right now." Hesitated for a moment, then nodded and turned to leave. As she reached the door, she heard him speak again, his voice slightly softer but still cold. "And don't expect me to thank you for anything. I didn't ask for you to be here." She paused, her hand on the door handle. "I don't expect thanks, mister. I'm just doing my job." And with that, she left the room, closing the door gently behind her. As she walked back through the hallway, her hands were shaking slightly, but not from fear. She had seen something in his eyes beyond the anger and bitterness. She had seen hurt. Deep, the first week at estate felt like walking through a minefield where never knew when she might trigger an explosion. Was true to his word. He kept her at a distance, speaking to her only when absolutely necessary, and even then his words were clipped and cold. He would call for her when he needed help transferring from his wheelchair to his bed, when he needed assistance with his physical therapy exercises, or when he required his medications. Beyond those moments, he acted as if she didn't exist. Learned his routine quickly. He woke at 7, though he often lay in bed staring at the ceiling until she came in at 8 to help him start the day. He refused breakfast most mornings, accepting only black coffee that he drank while staring out the window. His physical therapist, a cheerful man named David, came 3 times a week, and those sessions were the only time seemed to engage with any energy, though it was usually angry energy directed at pushing his body beyond its limits. In the afternoons would retreat to his study, a dark room lined with books and expensive art, where he worked on his laptop for hours. Learned from that he still managed some of his business affairs remotely, though he had handed over the day-to-day operations to his partners. In the evenings, he would have dinner brought to his room, pick at it without real interest, and then spend hours reading or listening to music in the dark. It was a lonely existence, and watching it day after day made his heart ache. She had grown up with little, but she had always been surrounded by warmth and laughter and life. Her home might have been small and poor, but it was filled with love. This mansion was the opposite. It had everything money could buy, but it felt empty, like a beautiful shell with nothing living inside it. Despite its cold treatment, remained patient and kind. She learned to read his moods, to know when he wanted absolute silence and when he might tolerate brief conversation. She never pushed, never tried to force cheerfulness on him, and never treated him with the pity he clearly despised. She simply did her job with quiet efficiency and treated him with the same dignity she would want for herself. On her 8th day at the estate, something shifted. It was a Thursday afternoon and had been cleaning his room while he was in his study. She had finished changing the bed linens and was dusting the shelves when she noticed a photograph tucked behind some books. It showed a younger, probably in his late 20s, standing on a mountain peak with his arms raised in triumph. He was smiling, his whole face lit up with joy and vitality. He looked so alive, so different from the man she knew now. She was still holding the photograph when she heard the sound of his wheelchair at the door. She quickly tried to put it back, but it slipped from her fingers and fell to the floor. Rolled into the room and saw her scrambling to pick it up. "What are you doing?" His voice was sharp, accusatory. "I'm sorry," said quickly, holding out the photograph. "I was dusting and I found this. I didn't mean to pry." Snatched the photograph from her hand, his jaw clenched tight. He stared at it for a long moment and saw something crack in his expression, a flash of grief so profound it made her want to look away. "That was Mount," he said quietly, his voice devoid of its usual edge. "I climbed it 3 years ago. I used to climb mountains, run marathons, go skydiving. I used to do whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted." He laughed, but it was a bitter, hollow sound. "Now I can't even walk across a room." Stood there unsure if she should speak or remain silent. Finally, she said softly, "You're still the same person who climbed that mountain. That strength is still inside you." Looked up at her, his eyes blazing. "You don't know anything about me. That person is gone. He died in that accident, and what's left is just a shell going through the motions." "I don't believe that," said, surprising herself with her boldness. "I think you're hurt and angry, and you have every right to be, but you're not gone. You're still here, and as long as you're breathing, you have the chance to find a new way to live." "A new way to live?" His voice rose. "In this chair, unable to do any of the things that made life worth living, this isn't life, it's existence, and barely that. My father used to say that life isn't about what we can do, it's about who we are," said, her voice steady despite the intensity of his anger. "You've lost your ability to walk, mister, but you haven't lost yourself. Not unless you choose to." For a moment she thought he might explode at her, might order her out of the room or out of the house entirely. But instead, he just stared at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Then he turned his wheelchair away and said quietly, "Get out." Left, her heart pounding. She had probably crossed a line, said too much. She half expected to come to her room that evening and tell her to pack her things. But no one came, and the next morning, when she went to his room, he was waiting for her as usual. He didn't mention their conversation, and neither did she. But something had changed. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. He looked at her differently now, with something that might have been curiosity mixed with the anger. Over the following weeks, began to notice small things about that others might have missed. She noticed that he had nightmares, waking up in the middle of the night with gasps that echoed through the quiet house. She noticed that he had scars on his arms that he tried to hide, remnants from the accident that had changed his life. She noticed that he kept a journal he wrote in late at night, filling pages with words she never tried to read. She also noticed his kindness, buried deep beneath all the pain. When Thomas, the driver, mentioned that his grandson was sick, quietly arranged for the best doctors and covered all the medical expenses. When arthritis flared up, making it hard for her to work, he insisted she take time off with full pay. He did these things without fanfare, without wanting recognition, as if being kind was something to be ashamed of. One rainy afternoon, about a month into her time at the estate, was helping with his exercises when the power went out. The house was plunged into darkness, and somewhere in the building, an alarm started beeping. "It's the backup generator," said. "It should kick in any moment." But minutes passed, and the house remained dark. The rain pounded against the windows, and thunder rumbled in the distance. His voice called from somewhere downstairs, saying she was going to check the generator in the basement. And sat in the growing darkness of his room. She had been helping him with leg stretches, and they were now in an awkward position, her hands still supporting his leg. "You can let go," said. "Are you sure? I don't want you to strain anything." "I'm fine, just put my leg down slowly." She did as he asked, then moved to sit in the chair beside his bed. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the sound of rain and distant thunder. "Are you afraid of storms?" asked suddenly. "No," said. "I actually like them. When I was little, my father used to take me outside when it rained. He said rain was the earth's way of washing away the old and making room for the new. We'd stand there getting soaked, and he'd tell me stories about how the rain gave life to everything." "Your father sounds like he was a good man." "He was the best man I've ever known," said softly. "He died when I was 12. Sometimes I still miss him so much it hurts." There was a pause and then said, "How did you deal with it, the loss?" Thought about the question carefully. "I don't think you ever really deal with loss completely. You just learn to carry it. Some days it's heavier than others, but you keep moving forward because that's what living is. My father wouldn't have wanted me to stop living just because he was gone." "And what if moving forward feels impossible?" His voice was quiet, vulnerable in a way she had never heard before. "Then you take smaller steps," said. "You focus on one moment at a time, one day at a time. You let people help you. And eventually those small steps add up to distance you never thought you could travel." The darkness seemed to make their conversation easier, as if without seeing each other clearly, they could speak more honestly. "I used to think I was invincible," said after a long silence. "I built a company from nothing, made my first million by 25, my first billion by 30. I thought success meant being completely independent, never needing anyone. And then in one moment, everything changed. Suddenly, I needed help for everything. I couldn't even dress myself at first. Do you know what that does to someone who prided himself on never needing anyone?" "It makes you human," said gently. "We all need each other, mister. That's not weakness, that's just life." "You really believe that, don't you?" There was wonder in his voice, as if the concept was foreign to him. "I know it, I've lived it. My family survived my father's death because we held each other up. My village survives hardships because we help each other. None of us can do this alone, and we're not supposed to." Before could respond, the lights flickered back on, appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath. "Sorry about that. The generator is working now. Old house, old systems. Are you both all right?" "We're fine," said, and for the first time since had met him, there was no edge to his voice when he spoke to someone. After that evening, things began to change more noticeably. Started asking about her life, about her village, about her family. At first, his questions were brief and casual, but gradually they became more frequent and more personal. She told him about her mother's strength, about her siblings' dreams, about the simplicity and hardship of rural life. She spoke of long walks through fields, of community gatherings where everyone shared what little they had, of the way the stars looked when there were no city lights to drown them out. In return, began to share pieces of his own story. He told her about building his company, about the thrill of taking risks and seeing them pay off. He talked about his parents, both deceased now, who had been cold and distant, more interested in status than in their son. He spoke about the isolation that came with wealth, how the higher he climbed, the more alone he felt. He described the accident in halting words, the moment when his car lost control, the strange clarity he had as it plunged off the bridge, the darkness that followed. "When I woke up in the hospital and they told me I would never walk again, I wanted to die," he admitted one day. "For months, I hoped I wouldn't wake up each morning. I pushed everyone away because I couldn't stand the pity in their eyes. I built these walls because it hurt less than letting people see me like this." "And now," asked softly, looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw that his eyes were different. The anger was still there, but it was no longer the only thing. "Now I'm not sure. You make it harder to hide." "Good," said with a small smile. "Hiding doesn't help you heal." As the weeks turned into months, a routine developed between them that felt less like caregiver and patient, and more like two people sharing space and slowly becoming friends. Started joining the household for dinner occasionally, something he hadn't done in over a year. He began to show interest in his therapy again, pushing himself not out of anger but out of a genuine desire to improve. He even laughed sometimes, usually at stories told about her chaotic childhood or the characters in her village. Found herself looking forward to their time together, was intelligent and funny when he let his guard down. He had opinions on everything and loved to debate, challenging her ideas and listening when she challenged his. He had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. Beneath all the pain and bitterness, there was a man worth knowing. But there were still hard days. Days when the weight of his situation crushed down on and he retreated into darkness. Days when he snapped at everyone and refused help. Days when found him staring out the window with such profound sadness that it brought tears to her eyes. On those days, she didn't try to 4 months into her time at estate, received a letter from home. Her mother's handwriting sprawled across the page in the careful script of someone who hadn't had much formal education but took pride in each word. The news was mostly good. Grace was doing well in school and had been chosen to read at the village assembly. Her brothers had helped harvest a bumper crop. The roof had been fixed, but toward the end of the letter, her mother's tone shifted. She wrote that she missed terribly that the house felt empty without her laughter and presence. She said that while the money was helpful, money couldn't replace a daughter. She asked when might visit, even just for a few days. Reading those words, felt a pang of homesickness so sharp it took her breath away. She realized she hadn't been back to since she left, hadn't held her little sister or sat with her mother in the evening. She had been so caught up in her new life, in caring for, that she had let time slip away. That evening she approached after dinner. He was in the library, browsing through a book on architecture, one of his many interests. He looked up when she entered, and she noticed how different he looked from the man she had first met. There was more light in his eyes, less tension in his shoulders. He even smiled slightly when he saw her. He said, "I was wondering if you'd join me. I wanted to get your opinion on something." "Actually, I need to ask you something first," she said, sitting in the chair across from him. "Of course, what is it?" "I received a letter from my mother today. I haven't been home since I started working here, and I was hoping I might take a few days to visit. I know it's a lot to ask, and I understand if it's not possible. I can try to arrange for a temporary replacement while I'm gone." His expression shifted, something crossing his face that looked almost like disappointment. "How long would you need?" "Maybe 4 days, 3 for being there and a day each way for travel." He was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming on the arm of his wheelchair. Then he said, "Take a week." "A week, that's very generous, but I don't need." "Take a week," repeated, his voice firm but not unkind. "You've been working non-stop since you got here. You deserve time with your family, and—" He paused, meeting her eyes. "Thank you for asking instead of just leaving. I appreciate that." Felt warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you, mister. This means everything to me." He said suddenly, "I think after 4 months you can call me." She smiled, "Thank you." 2 days later found herself on the same bus route she had taken months ago, but this time traveling in reverse. As the city gave way to countryside, she felt her heart lift. The air smelled different, cleaner, filled with the scent of grass and earth. The landscape was familiar and beloved, each hill and tree a landmark of her childhood. When the bus finally pulled into small station, saw her whole family waiting. Grace spotted her first and came running, nearly knocking her over with the force of her hug. Her mother was crying and laughing at the same time, holding S's face in her work-worn hands as if to make sure she was real. Her brothers crowded around, taller than she remembered, and her other sisters peppered her with questions. The week she spent in was like stepping back into herself. She helped her mother in the garden, went to the market with her sisters, played with the village children, and spent evenings sitting around the fire listening to stories and gossip. She realized how much she had missed the simplicity of this life, the way people cared for each other without ulterior motives, the way joy could be found in small things like a good meal or a beautiful sunset. But she also noticed how much she had changed. She caught herself comparing the village to the city, seeing limitations she had never noticed before. She felt restless in a way she never had, aware of a larger world beyond these familiar borders. And late at night, lying in her old bed with her sisters sleeping nearby, she found her thoughts drifting back to Estate, wondering how was doing, hoping he was all right. On her last evening home, her mother sat with her on the porch after the others had gone to bed. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. "You're different," her mother said, not unkindly. "You've grown in these months." "Is that bad?" asked. "No, child, it's natural. You're becoming who you're meant to be." Her mother paused, then added, "But I see something else too. You think about him a lot, don't you? This man you care for." Felt her cheeks warm. "He needs a lot of care." Her mother smiled knowingly. "I'm sure he does. Just be careful. The world you're in now, it's not our world. The rules are different and the stakes are higher." "I know, Mama. I'm just doing my job." Her mother reached over and squeezed her hand. "I know you are. I trust you. Just remember to take care of your own heart, too." When returned to the estate, it was late afternoon. Thomas picked her up from the bus station, and during the drive, he mentioned casually that it had been difficult while she was gone, snapping at everyone and refusing to eat properly. "He's been asking about when you'd return every day," Thomas added with a slight smile. "I think he missed you." Found in his room, staring out the window as he so often did. He turned when he heard the door open and his face transformed. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close, and the relief in his eyes was unmistakable. "You're back," he said simply. "I'm back," she confirmed. "Did you miss me?" She meant it as a light joke, but answered seriously. "Yes, I did." The honesty in his voice made his heart skip. "Well, I'm here now, and from what I hear, you've been giving everyone a hard time." "They're not you," said, then seemed embarrassed by his own admission. "I mean, they don't understand my routine the way you do." "Of course," said softly, understanding what he couldn't quite say. "How about I make you some tea and you can tell me what I missed?" Over tea, told her about his week. He had started a new project, consulting for a green energy startup. He had also had a visit from his aunt, Mrs., who had been pleasantly surprised by his improved mood and attitude. But mostly, he seemed to want to hear about's trip. She told him about her village, painting pictures with her words of the place she came from. She described her family, the community, the simplicity and beauty of that life. Listened with an intensity that made her feel like every word mattered. "It sounds wonderful," he said when she finished. "You must miss it." "I do," admitted. "But I miss this too when I'm there. I think maybe home is becoming more complicated than just one place." Something in his expression softened. "I'm glad you consider this home too. I know it's not the same as your village, but you've made this house feel different. Better." In the weeks that followed, their relationship deepened in ways that surprised them both. They began having dinner together every evening, talking for hours about everything and nothing. Showed her his business ventures, explaining the tech industry and market forces with a passion that reminded her of the driven man he once was. Shared her dreams with him, things she had never told anyone about wanting to help people, about maybe studying nursing or social work someday. "You'd be incredible at that," said one evening. "You have a gift for caring for people, not just physically but emotionally. You see people as they are and meet them there." "Is that what I did with you?" asked with a slight smile. "That's exactly what you did with me. When everyone else saw a broken, bitter man, you saw someone who was hurting. You didn't try to fix me or change me. You just stayed and let me find my own way back." "You did the hard work," said. "I just walked beside you." Reached out and took her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them. "You did more than that. You gave me a reason to try." The physical contact between them had been increasing gradually. A hand on a shoulder here, a brush of fingers there, moments that lingered longer than necessary. Told herself it was natural, that caring for someone created a certain intimacy. But she knew it was more than that. She felt drawn to in ways that had nothing to do with her job. She tried to maintain professional boundaries, but it was becoming harder, had become more than a patient to her. He was her friend, her confidant, someone whose happiness mattered to her in a deeply personal way. And the way he looked at her sometimes, with warmth and something that might have been longing, made her think he might feel the same way. But there were complications, realities she couldn't ignore. Was a billionaire who lived in a world of privilege she could barely imagine. She was a girl from a poor village, hired to care for him. The gulf between their worlds was vast, and knew that some gaps couldn't be bridged by feelings alone. One evening, surprised her by asking if she would accompany him to a gala. It was a charity event his company was sponsoring, and he had decided it was time to make a public appearance. "I know it's outside your job description," he said, "but I don't want to go with a nurse or an assistant. I want to go with someone who makes me feel strong. I want to go with you." His first instinct was to refuse. She didn't belong in that world, didn't have the right clothes or knowledge of how to behave at such events. But the vulnerability in his eyes, the fact that he was willing to face the world again and wanted her by his side, made her say yes. Helped her prepare, lending her an elegant dress and showing her the basics of formal etiquette. The night of the gala, barely recognized herself in the mirror. The dress was a deep emerald green that complemented her skin beautifully. Her hair was styled in intricate braids that Sneeze had helped create. She looked sophisticated, elegant, almost like she belonged. When saw her, he stared for a long moment before saying, "You look beautiful." "Thank you," said, feeling shy under his intense gaze. "You look very handsome, too." He did, in his tailored suit with his dark hair styled back. He looked every inch the powerful businessman he had once been. Only the wheelchair reminded her of how much he had overcome just to be here. The gala was overwhelming. The venue was a grand hotel ballroom decorated with thousands of flowers and glittering lights. People in designer clothes mingled with champagne glasses, their jewelry catching the light. A string quartet played in one corner while waiters circulated with trays of elaborate appetizers. Stayed close to as he navigated through the crowd. People approached him constantly, some with genuine warmth, others with barely concealed curiosity about his condition and his companion. She noticed the way some looked at her, their eyes questioning who she was and why she was there with. Seemed to sense her discomfort. He introduced her simply as his friend and kept his hand on hers throughout the evening. When one particularly obnoxious businessman made a comment about still having an eye for beautiful women despite everything, his response was cold and cutting. Is here because she's kind enough to support me during my first public event in 2 years. Any other observations you'd like to share would be unwelcome. The man backed away quickly and turned to with an apologetic expression. I'm sorry, people can be thoughtless. It's all right, said, though she felt the sting of being reduced to just an attractive accessory. I understand. But shook his head. No, it's not all right, you deserve better than that. He paused, then added, would you like to get some air? This place is suffocating. They found their way to a balcony overlooking the city. The night air was cool and refreshing after the warmth of the crowded ballroom. City lights stretched out before them like a blanket of stars. Thank you for coming with me tonight, said. I know this world isn't easy to navigate. You're right, it's not, said honestly. But I'm glad I could be here for you. You were very brave to come. I didn't feel brave, I felt terrified, turned his wheelchair to face her, but having you here made it bearable. They stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of the party muffled behind them. Then spoke again, his voice low and serious. I need to tell you something. Over these past months, you've become breath caught in her throat. She had imagined this moment, dreamed about it during quiet nights when she allowed herself to think about as more than her patient. But now that the words hung in the air between them, she felt paralyzed by the weight of what they meant. She began, her voice unsteady. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything right now, he said quickly, though she could see the fear of rejection in his eyes. I just needed you to know. These feelings, they're real and they're strong, and I can't keep pretending they don't exist. It's not that simple, said, wrapping her arms around herself. You're my employer, I work for you. And beyond that, we come from completely different worlds. Tonight showed me that more than ever. Those people in there, they see me as someone who doesn't belong, and maybe they're right. They're not right, said fiercely. You belong anywhere you choose to be, and as for different worlds, I don't care. I've lived in the world of wealth my entire life, and it's never brought me genuine happiness. These past months with you, talking and laughing and just being together, that's been more real than anything I've experienced in years. Felt tears prick her eyes. But what about my job? If we cross this line, everything changes. What happens if things don't work out? I can't afford to lose this position. My family depends on the money I send home. I would never let you be in that position, said earnestly. Whatever happens between us, I'll make sure you and your family are taken care of. That's a promise. That's exactly the problem, said, a tear sliding down her cheek. That's the power imbalance we can't escape. You can make promises like that because you have the wealth and power. I have neither. How can I know if my feelings are real or if they're just gratitude for the life you've given me? How can you know if you love me or if you're just dependent on me because I take care of you? It was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. I've thought about that. I've questioned my own feelings, wondered if what I felt was real or just the result of circumstances. But when I think about my future, you're in it. Not as my caregiver, but as my partner. When something good happens, you're the first person I want to tell. When I'm struggling, you're the one I want beside me. That's not dependency. That's love. Looked at him, this man who had started as a bitter stranger and had become someone she cared for more than she wanted to admit. I do have feelings for you, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. When I was home visiting my family, I missed you constantly. I thought about you and wondered how you were doing. And tonight, when that man made that comment, I wanted to defend you not as your employee, but as someone who cares about you deeply. His face lit up with hope. Then we can figure out the rest. We can navigate the complications together. Can we? Asked. You live in a mansion. I grew up in a house with a leaking roof. You travel the world for business. I've never been on a plane. You went to prestigious universities. I barely finished high school. These aren't small differences. They're just circumstances, argued. They don't define who we are as people. You're one of the most intelligent, compassionate, strong people I've ever met. Your education came from life, from real experiences, and it's more valuable than any degree. And as for travel and money, those are things we can share. I want to show you the world. I want to support you in pursuing your education if that's what you want. I want to build a life together. shook her head, overwhelmed by the intensity of his words and the enormity of what he was offering. I need time to think about this. It's too much, too fast. I understand, said, though disappointment flickered across his face. Take all the time you need, but please know that I meant every word. You've changed my life, and I don't want to go back to who I was before you. They returned to the gala shortly after, but the evening felt different now. Was hyper-aware of every glance sent her way, every casual touch of his hand. The words he had spoken echoed in her mind, making it hard to focus on anything else. Over the next few weeks, things between them shifted into an awkward territory. They were both careful around each other, professional in their interactions, but with an underlying tension that hadn't been there before. Didn't bring up his confession again, giving the space she had asked for. But she could feel his eyes on her when he thought she wasn't looking, could sense the questions he wanted to ask but held back. Found herself torn in ways she had never experienced. Her practical side told her that pursuing a relationship with was foolish, that the obstacles were too great and the risks too high. But her heart argued differently. It reminded her of the way he made her laugh, of their long conversations about everything and nothing, of the way he looked at her like she was the most important person in his world. She confided in one afternoon while helping prepare dinner. The older woman had become something of a mentor too, and she valued her wisdom. I wondered when this would happen, said without surprise. I've watched you two grow closer these past months. It was inevitable, really. But is it right? Asked. He's my employer and we're from such different backgrounds. Paused in chopping vegetables and looked at thoughtfully. I've worked for wealthy families for 30 years. I've seen all kinds of relationships, good and bad. What I've learned is that money and status don't determine whether love works. What matters is mutual respect, genuine care, and the willingness to work through difficulties together. She smiled. I've seen the way Mr. looks at you, child, and I've seen the way you look at him when you think no one is watching. That's real. But what if it's not enough? Asked. What if the world won't accept us together? The world will always have opinions, said wisely. But you don't live your life for the world. You live it for yourself and the people you love. The question isn't whether it will be easy, because it won't be. The question is whether it's worth fighting for. That night lay in bed thinking about words. She thought about her mother's warning to guard her heart, about the vast differences between her life and about all the practical reasons why a relationship between them seemed impossible. But she also thought about how empty her life would feel without him, about how much brighter the world seemed when they were together, about the possibility of love that transcended circumstances. The next morning, she made her decision. She found in his study, working on his laptop. He looked up when she entered, and she saw hope and fear war in his expression. Do you have a moment? She asked. Always, he said, closing his laptop and giving her his full attention. Sat in the chair across from his desk, gathering her courage. I've been thinking a lot about what you said at the gala, about your feelings for me, about building a future together. Leaned forward slightly, and I'm scared, admitted. I'm scared of how different our worlds are. I'm scared of what people will say. I'm scared of losing my job and not being able to support my family. I'm scared of getting hurt. She paused, meeting his eyes. But I'm more scared of wondering what if for the rest of my life. His face transformed with joy. Does that mean? It means I have feelings for you too, said, a smile breaking through despite her nervousness. Real feelings that I can't ignore anymore. I want to try. I want to see if we can make this work despite all the obstacles. Wheeled around his desk quickly and took her hands in his. We can. I promise you we'll figure it out together. And I meant what I said about your family. Whether this works out or not, I'll make sure they're taken care of. That's not contingent on our relationship. I appreciate that, said. But I need you to understand something. I don't want to be taken care of. I want to be an equal partner. That means I need to find my own path, my own career, my own purpose beyond being your caregiver or girlfriend. Can you accept that? Absolutely, said without hesitation. In fact, I've been thinking about that. You mentioned wanting to study nursing or social work. What if we made that happen? You could enroll in courses, continue working part-time if you want to maintain your independence and pursue your dreams. That would mean a lot to me, said softly. Having my own identity, my own accomplishments. You already have those things, said. But I want to support you in expanding them. You've given so much to me, let me give something back. They talked for hours that day, mapping out what a relationship between them might look like. They agreed to take things slowly, to be honest with each other about their concerns and needs, and to face challenges as a team. Also insisted that they discuss the situation with his aunt, Mrs., who had been instrumental in bringing to the estate. Mrs. visited the following weekend. She was a refined woman in her 60s who had always treated with kindness and respect. Over tea in the garden, explained the situation. "We wanted you to know because you brought here," said, "and because your opinion matters to me." Mrs. looked between them, her expression unreadable. Then she smiled warmly. "I had hoped this might happen. When I met I saw something special in her. And when I asked her to care for you, it wasn't just because I thought she would be good at the job. I hoped she might reach the part of you that was still alive beneath all that pain and anger." "You knew?" asked in surprise. "I suspected," Mrs. corrected. "I've known since he was a boy. I know his heart even when he tries to hide it, and I could see that you have the kind of spirit that could complement his." She paused, her expression becoming serious. "But I won't pretend this will be easy. There will be people who judge you, who question your motives. There will be challenges you can't even anticipate yet. Are you both prepared for that?" "We are," said firmly, taking's hand. Mrs. nodded approvingly. "Then you have my blessing and my support. And dear, ignore anyone who makes you feel like you don't belong. You belong wherever you choose to be, and anyone who truly knows will see what I see, that you've brought him back to life." With Mrs. support and began their relationship in earnest. They kept it private at first, not ready to face public scrutiny. Within the estate, the staff noticed the change but said nothing, though caught smiling knowingly on more than one occasion. The dynamics of their relationship shifted naturally. Continued to assist with things he needed help with, but it felt different now. There was more laughter, more casual affection, more moments of simple happiness. They would have breakfast together on the terrace, talking about their plans for the day. Started teaching about his business ventures, genuinely interested in her opinions. Shared more about her village life, and listened with fascination, asking questions about traditions and community practices he had never encountered. Also encouraged to pursue her education. He connected her with a university that offered programs for working adults, and she enrolled in courses toward a nursing degree. The studying was challenging, especially balancing it with her responsibilities, but supported her completely, often staying up late to quiz her for exams or discuss her coursework. The first real test of their relationship came when had to attend a business conference. It was a big event where industry leaders gathered to discuss innovation and investment opportunities. Wanted to join him, not as his caregiver, but as his partner. "I want people to know about us," he said one evening. "I want to introduce you properly as the woman I love." Felt anxiety grip her chest. "Are you sure? Once we go public, there's no taking it back. People will talk. They'll dig into my background, question why you're with me." "Let them talk," said firmly. "I'm not ashamed of our relationship, and I won't hide you away like you're something to be embarrassed about. You mean everything to me. The world needs to know that." So found herself preparing for another high-profile event, but this time with a different title. She wasn't the caregiver or the companion. She was girlfriend, and the thought the business conference was held in a luxury resort 3 hours away from the city. Had arranged for them to travel in a specially equipped van that could accommodate his wheelchair, and they made the journey together, talking and laughing like they always did. But as they got closer to their destination, felt her nervousness return. Noticed and reached for her hand. "Hey, look at me. We're in this together, remember? If anyone says or does anything that makes you uncomfortable, we leave. No questions asked." "I just don't want to embarrass you," admitted quietly. Squeezed her hand. "That's impossible. You could never embarrass me. If anything, I'm worried about embarrassing you. I'm still learning how to navigate social events in this chair, and I still have moments where I get frustrated or angry." "Then we'll handle it together," said, echoing his earlier words. "Both our struggles, both our strengths." The conference was everything expected and more. The resort was magnificent, with sprawling grounds and buildings that looked like they belonged in architectural magazines. The attendees were a mix of successful entrepreneurs, investors, and tech innovators, all dressed in expensive suits and designer dresses. When wheeled into the main hall at his side, heads turned. Could feel the weight of their stares, could almost hear the whispers. Who was she? Where did she come from? Why was one of the most successful businessmen of his generation with this unknown woman from nowhere? But seemed unfazed. He introduced to everyone they met, calling her his partner without hesitation. Some people were warm and welcoming, genuinely happy to see re-engaging with the business world. Others were cooler, their eyes sharp with judgment or calculation. The most difficult moment came during a cocktail reception on the second evening. Was getting drinks when she overheard two women talking near the bar. They didn't realize she could hear them, or perhaps they didn't care. "Can you believe he's here with that girl?" one of them said, her voice dripping with disdain. "I mean, she's obviously just after his money. Did you see her dress, trying too hard to fit in?" "I heard she was his caregiver or something," the other woman replied. "How convenient, right? Take care of a vulnerable billionaire and then seduce him. It's like something out of a bad movie." Felt like she had been slapped. Her hands shook as she picked up the drinks, fighting back tears. She wanted to confront them to defend herself, but she knew it would only make things worse. Instead, she walked away with as much dignity as she could muster. Took one look at her face when she returned and immediately knew something was wrong. "What happened?" "Nothing," said, trying to smile. "Just tired." "But wasn't fooled. Tell me, please." So quietly repeated what she had heard. As she spoke, she watched expression darken with anger. "Who said that? Point them out to me." "No, it doesn't matter." "It does matter," he said fiercely. "Nobody gets to talk about you like that." "But they're not entirely wrong, are they?" said, her voice breaking slightly. "I was your caregiver. We did meet because I was hired to take care of you. People are going to think what they want to think." "They're completely wrong," said firmly. "They don't know you. They don't know your heart, your strength, your incredible capacity for compassion. They don't know that you stayed with me not because of my money, but in spite of my terrible attitude. They don't know that you've changed my life in ways that have nothing to do with physical care." He cupped her face gently. "And if they can't see what an amazing person you are, then their opinion means nothing." Leaned into his touch, drawing strength from his certainty. "How do you do that? How do you always know the right thing to say?" "Because I love you," said simply. "And when you love someone, you see them clearly. You see their worth even when they doubt it themselves." That night, back in their suite, held while she cried out her frustration and hurt. He listened as she talked about feeling like an outsider, about the pressure of trying to fit into a world that didn't want her, about the fear that she would never be accepted. "Maybe we should just keep this private," she said. "I can be with you without being in the spotlight. We don't need to prove anything to anyone." Was quiet for a long moment before responding. "Is that what you really want, or are you just tired of fighting?" "Both," admitted. "I want to be with you, but I'm exhausted from constantly feeling like I have to defend my right to exist in your world." "Then we'll do it differently," said. "We'll build our own world, one that doesn't rely on other people's approval. And when we do engage with the public, we'll do it on our own terms." Over the next few months, that's exactly what they did. Began scaling back his public appearances, choosing to focus on business ventures he could manage remotely. He started a foundation focused on providing opportunities for people from rural areas, creating scholarships and job training programs. Became heavily involved in the foundation work, using her first-hand knowledge of the challenges faced by people from backgrounds like hers. The foundation became their shared passion project. They traveled to different rural communities, met with local leaders, and developed programs that actually addressed real needs. Flourished in this role, her natural empathy and understanding making her invaluable. She wasn't just girlfriend anymore. She was co-founder of a foundation that was changing lives. Her studies in nursing continued as well, and she excelled. Her professors were impressed by her dedication and her unique perspective. She often incorporated lessons from her village upbringing, sharing traditional healing practices and community care models that offered alternatives to Western medical approaches. Meanwhile, her relationship with continued to deepen. They had disagreements, of course, could still be stubborn and controlling sometimes, and would call him out on it. She sometimes felt overwhelmed by the pace of her new life and needed space that had to learn to respect. But they worked through each conflict with honesty and genuine effort to understand each other. Also made efforts to understand the world better. He visited with her, much to the surprise and delight of her family and community. Seeing him interact with her mother, playing with her siblings, sitting around the fire listening to village elders tell stories, fell even more deeply in love with him. He didn't condescend or act like he was slumming it. He genuinely engaged, asked questions, and showed respect for a way of life so different from his own. Her mother pulled aside during that visit. "I was wrong to worry," she said with tears in her eyes. He loves you, truly loves you. I can see it in how he looks at you, how he listens when you speak, and you love him the same way. I do, Mama said. He's not perfect and our life isn't easy, but it's real. It's ours. That's all that matters, child. That's all that ever matters. A year and a half after they had first met, surprised with a trip. He wouldn't tell her where they were going, just asked her to pack for warm weather and adventure. They flew on a private plane, another reminder of the vast resources had, but this time didn't feel awkward about it. She had learned to accept that wealth was part of his reality, just as her modest upbringing was part of hers. They were learning to merge their worlds rather than exist in separate ones. When they landed, realized they were in Tanzania, near Mount. She remembered the photograph she had found all those months ago, standing triumphant at the peak. "Why are we here?" she asked, though she thought she might know. Smiled, the kind of full, genuine smile that still made her heart skip. "I want to show you something." Over the next few days, they explored the area around the mountain. Had arranged for a special adaptive hiking program that allowed him to experience the trails in his wheelchair with the help of experienced guides and specialized equipment. It wasn't the same as climbing to the summit, but he could still feel the mountain, breathe the thin air, experience the majesty of the place that had once meant so much to him. On their third evening there, as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, turned to with an expression of such love and vulnerability that it took her breath away. "When I climbed this mountain 3 years ago, I thought I was on top of the world. I had money, success, the ability to do anything I wanted, but I was empty inside. I didn't know it then, but I was missing the most important thing." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I was missing you." His hands flew to her mouth as opened the box to reveal a beautiful ring. It wasn't ostentatious or overwhelming, but elegant and perfect, with a design that incorporated elements from both their worlds. "You came into my life when I was at my lowest point. You saw past the anger and bitterness to the man I could still be. You challenged me, supported me, and loved me when I couldn't love myself. You've shown me that true strength isn't about what you can do physically, but about how you face adversity, how you treat people, how you love." His voice broke with emotion. "I can't imagine my life without you in it. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down his face as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Finally, she found her voice. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and they held each other as the sun dipped below the horizon, both crying happy tears. Around them, their guides and support team applauded and cheered, sharing in their joy. That night, lying together under the African stars, reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought about the scared young woman from who had packed her grandmother's old suitcase and traveled to the city. She thought about the broken man in the wheelchair who had pushed everyone away. She marveled at how they had both been transformed by love, by the courage to be vulnerable, by the willingness to bridge the gaps between their different worlds. "What are you thinking about?" asked softly. "I'm thinking about how far we've both come," said. "When I first arrived at your house, I was so intimidated. You seemed so unreachable, so determined to stay locked in your pain. I never imagined we would end up here." "I was unreachable," admitted. "I had convinced myself that my life was over, that nothing good could ever happen again. But you refused to accept that. You just kept showing up day after day, being patient and kind and real. You didn't try to fix me with false optimism, but you also didn't let me wallow in self-pity forever." "We fixed each other," said. "You gave me opportunities I never dreamed possible. You supported my education, believed in my abilities, and treated me as an equal even when the world said we weren't." "Because we are equals," said firmly. "In the ways that matter, we always have been. You have strengths I don't have, and I have strengths you don't have. Together we're better than we are apart." Their wedding took place 6 months later, and it was a blend of both their worlds. The ceremony was held on the grounds of the estate, but they incorporated traditions from S village. Her mother and siblings were there, along with friends from S business associates attended alongside the village elders. Mrs. cried tears of joy and even was seen dabbing at her eyes. Wore a dress that honored both her heritage and her new life. It was elegant and modern, but incorporated traditional fabrics and patterns from her village. Looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. When they exchanged vows, spoke from the heart. "You walked into my darkness and became my light. You showed me that being broken doesn't mean being finished, and that needing help doesn't make you weak. You've taught me about real strength, about love that isn't based on what someone can do for you, but on who they are. I promise to spend the rest of my life honoring you, supporting your dreams, and building a future together that honors both where we came from and where we're going. His vows were equally moving. You saw value in me when I was just a girl from a forgotten village. You gave me opportunities, but more importantly, you gave me respect and love. You challenged me to dream bigger and reach higher. You showed me that love can bridge any gap if both people are willing to walk toward each other. I promise to stand beside you in all things, to be your partner in joy and in struggle, and to love you for who you are, not who you were or who you might become. After the ceremony, they celebrated with music and dancing that mixed classical pieces with traditional village songs. Watched as danced with her mother, both of them laughing. She saw her siblings playing with the children of wealthy business executives, all barriers forgotten in the simple joy of being kids. She saw two worlds coming together, not perfectly but beautifully, creating something new and wonderful. As the evening wore on and the celebration continued and slipped away for a quiet moment, they sat together on a bench overlooking the gardens, now lit with thousands of twinkling lights. Happy asked, pulling her clothes. Incredibly, said, resting her head on his shoulder. Are you? More than I ever thought possible, he said. You know, when that accident happened, I thought my life was over. I couldn't see past the loss, couldn't imagine finding meaning or joy again. But you showed me that life doesn't end when things change. It just becomes different, and different can be beautiful. I was so scared when I first came here, confessed. Scared of failing, of not being good enough, of this world that was so foreign to me. I never imagined I would find home in a mansion, love with a billionaire, and a purpose that combines everything I am. That's because home isn't a place, said softly. It's the people we love and who love us back. It's the life we build together, brick by brick, day by day. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Finally, spoke again. What's next for us? What does our future look like? Smiled, whatever we want it to. We'll continue the foundation work, changing lives in rural communities. You'll finish your nursing degree and probably revolutionize healthcare with your ideas. We'll travel, experience the world together. We'll have arguments and make up. We'll face challenges and overcome them. We'll build a family, whether through children of our own or through the community we create. He paused, looking into her eyes. But most importantly, we'll do it together. Together, repeated, the word feeling like a promise and a prayer. Years later, when people asked about her unlikely love story, she would tell them that it wasn't about a poor girl winning the heart of a rich man. It was about two broken people finding each other and becoming whole. It was about love that transcended circumstances, about courage to bridge divides, and about the power of seeing past external differences to the human heart beneath. Would add that it was about learning that strength comes in many forms, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is accept help, that vulnerability isn't weakness but the foundation of real connection, and that the best things in life often come from the most unexpected places. Their foundation grew over the years, helping thousands of people from rural communities access education, healthcare, and opportunities. Became a nurse and eventually a healthcare administrator, developing programs that blended modern medicine with traditional healing practices. Continued to consult on business ventures, but he chose projects that aligned with their shared values of equity and community empowerment. They faced challenges, of course. There were still people who questioned their relationship, who made assumptions based on their different backgrounds. They had moments of struggle, times when their different upbringings led to misunderstandings or conflict. But they faced everything together, with honesty and commitment to understanding each other's perspectives. Never forgot her roots in. She returned often, bringing with her, and they made sure to invest in the village's development. A new school was built, the medical clinic was upgraded, and young people were given scholarships to pursue their dreams. His family thrived, and she took pride in knowing that her success had created opportunities for those she loved. Continued his physical therapy and made incremental improvements. While he never regained the ability to walk, he found new ways to experience the world. He learned adaptive sports, traveled to places he never thought he'd see again, and most importantly, he learned that his worth wasn't tied to his physical abilities. Together, they proved that love could overcome extraordinary obstacles, that two people from completely different worlds could create a new world together, that patience and kindness could transform lives, that hope could emerge from the darkest places, and that sometimes the person you need most is the one you least expect. As looked back on her journey from a small village to a life she could never have imagined, She realized that every step had led her exactly where she needed to be. The scared young woman who packed her grandmother's suitcase had grown into a confident woman who knew her own worth. The bitter man in the wheelchair had transformed into a loving partner who saw value beyond physical ability. Their story wasn't a fairy tale where magic solved all problems. It was a real story about real people choosing love every day, working through difficulties, celebrating victories, and building a life of meaning and purpose together. It was about seeing past surfaces to souls, about recognizing that true wealth has nothing to do with money, and about the extraordinary power of two hearts willing to meet each other halfway. In the end, didn't win's heart through any dramatic gesture or grand sacrifice. She won it by being herself, by showing up day after day with patience and authenticity, by refusing to give up on him even when he had given up on himself, and won her heart by seeing her true value, by supporting her dreams, by growing and changing and becoming someone worthy of her love. Their love story became an inspiration to many, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. It showed that love could bridge any divide if both people were willing to walk toward each other. That strength comes in many forms, that healing is possible, and that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a simple act of kindness, a moment of connection, and the courage to believe that tomorrow can be better than today. And so they lived, not in a state of perpetual happiness, but in the kind of deep contentment that comes from facing life together, from building something meaningful, from loving and being loved in return. Their story reminded everyone who heard it that we are not defined by our circumstances, but by our choices, our resilience, and our capacity to love beyond boundaries. The black girl from the countryside and the paralyzed billionaire had found in each other what they both needed most. Not someone to complete them, but someone to walk beside them. Not someone to fix them, but someone to accept them. Not someone to change them, but someone to inspire them to become the best versions of themselves. And in doing so, they had created a love story that proved that the most powerful force in the world isn't money or status or physical ability. It's the human heart when it's brave enough to be open, strong enough to be vulnerable, and wise enough to choose love. Terrified and excited her why important to me. More than I expected, more than I thought was possible. You've helped me remember who I am beyond this chair, beyond the accident. You've given me hope when I thought I had none left. He paused, searching her face. I think I'm falling in love with you. Him up or offer empty platitudes. She just stayed close, a quiet presence that said without words, I'm here and you're not alone. And raw, the kind that came from losing everything you thought defined you. She had seen it before in her own village, in people who had lost loved ones or dreams or hope. And she knew that beneath all that armor he wore, there was still a human being who was suffering.